Oh my goodness, we're live.
Oh my God.
Which will let me ask you, if you have a seat next to you, can you defrag this room? Because we are standing room only right now. There are no seats empty next to people. Okay,
I'm so
sorry.
happy.
I'm very happy you're here.
Like, about profiling.
Profiling.
Wow.
This is dry as toast.
When you asked, should we record this, I was like, is that going to be enough? Looked like it brought all the depth to the art.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ari.
And I'm Matt.
And we're the Performance
Doctors.
Yeah.
But
You're proud. I love it.
it's great.
Thank you, Doctor.
Doctor.
So, this is Profiling with a Purpose, performance lessons from a real Unreal project. I'm going to start by introducing ourselves a little bit, specifically what we do. So, yes, I'm Ari. This is my handsome co-doctor, Matt. And we are part of the technical developer relations team at Epic Games. So what we do is that we do high-touch support for Epic Pro Support customers. That means, answering Epic Pro Support tickets, formerly known as UDN, ad hoc support if they are shipping and they really need our help. Guys, Unreal is just exploding. We're like, shouldn't do that. And proactive content like this presentation. Which, if you want, oh no, my stethoscope. If you want more info about how can I get these guys to help me with my studio, you can go to unrelented.com/support. It is like a package you can get. But of course, we just prefer if you didn't need us at all. Hence this presentation. We're trying to do more proactive talks so that, teach them how to fish instead of giving them a fish. And part of that is just going over how do we profile. Now I want to show you how I profile. Matt wants to show you how he profiles. Mm-hmm. Isn't that right?
That is right. I'm really, it's something that I've been doing all my career. I kind of take it for granted. And I do acknowledge that Unreal Insights can look quite daunting.
It is. So we want to show you our profiling methodology, but this is a really cool example because we have an actual real world in development game, and they donated their insights captures to us so we could show you what an actual game looks like when they, quote, haven't even started profiling yet.
Yeah, it's really nice because we didn't have to contrive a bunch of weird performance situations to oh, look, this is what it might look like in production. We actually got a production game that they let us talk about in front of all of you. So we're very excited about
No Lyra this time, no other sample projects that are already made by the Epic people. And it's hard to say, look, this is done wrong. And it's made by the brightest.
Yeah, we can't do that.
Yeah, but we needed to find a game. So how it started was, this was kind of a tentative talk. We were talking about
we were pitching this back and forth for months.
Yeah, maybe we should do it someday. And for this fest, I knew I was going to do the 101 tips and tricks with you that we did yesterday. And we managed to do 101 tips. Mm-hmm. So you should see that online if you haven't yet. And I was like, okay, I'll just put this up just in case I find something. So it was a LinkedIn post asking for real world projects. And honestly, I expected maybe a couple of indie projects like solo developers. They're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but I could use the exposure. But oh my God, we got over 40 submissions of all sizes. I think over half of them were actual AA projects.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of really good stuff. If you are in the room and you submitted, I'm sorry we didn't pick you. It's not about you.
We wanted though. We wanted to. It was some of these were I would have taken half of them. Just this is amazing. This is amazing. This is amazing. 2 of them even had a publisher. So, what game did we choose? I am going to just show the trailer. This is already announced. They haven't released yet. They're in heavy production right now, and they are now optimizing it based on our feedback. And also, they basically told us we're not optimizing yet. So this is a goldmine for you. And we're like, yes.
Yeah.
Trailer coming in 3, 2, 1.
Grow strong. Prove yourself.
Gunnar, have you come to start work on my smithy?
This place will soon start to feel like home.
We'll get a good price if there's any left alive. We are the store. A fine choice, Gunnar.
First man I kill, I'm taking his shoes. Face me if you dare!
Give them iron! Give them death!
By the door! They're here! The Creeper! We could not hold them!
I'm not a doctor. Wait, I mean, I am a doctor, and I think some of these stabs were lethal.
Some of that was very lethal, and that's why we had the sign out front.
Yes. If you're wondering what's the M for mature, it's because of this. So everything from here on is PG-13.
Totally. I might drop an F-bomb.
It is Norse Oath of Blood. Oh yeah, we can now.
Yeah.
So this is developed by Arctic Hazard, and it is published by Tripwire Presents. It is launching late 2025 of this year, if nothing goes wrong. And actually, I like we got the Viking theme here. So this is actually made in Norway. So go Nordics, woo! Yeah. And also me being Icelandic, we got that Norse blood in us. So I'm like, oh, my people, Frábært, Iceland. Okay, sorry. Usually the first step we'll go is give us captures. A studio will come up to us and say, like, we need your help. And we say,
something's wrong.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's like, something's wrong.
Something's wrong.
Give us captures.
So we say, go to the problematic area of the game and show us this rainbow diarrhea, and we can actually digest it. So we usually ask for Unreal Insights captures for CPU side, and Matt usually covers the GPU side, where you'll ask for...
Yeah, we'll do Pix, Razor, Render Doc, all that kind of GPU capture profilers.
What about this one?
Oh, and also in UE 5.6, we've added a new GPU profiler that unifies all of the GPU stats between Pix, Razor, Insights, Stat, GPU, all of it's together, and it shows us the compute pipe in Unreal Insights, which I'm very excited about. I don't know if Luke's talk has already happened, but...
I think it was the talk before this. Did anyone here go see Luke's talk? Hands up. It's about
great, good.
15% of the audience. Very nice.
Very nice.
You know more than I do now. Sometimes we'll get a dev build. That is not common, but in this case, we're like, okay, we want to, I want to be able to dig a bit deeper. So we can do our own captures to different programs. But yeah, like I said, it's usually not needed. It's very rare. I maybe gotten it once before this because it is extra work for us. We'd rather just tell them to do the capture for us. So let's start with how do we profile Norse? Of course, the first step is just getting the build. And Arctic Hazard provided us with a Steam code for the dev build, which I actually think is quite a good way to distribute PC builds, is using like the launcher, whether that's Epic Games Store or Steam build or something like that. Because you're already paying the $100/euro fee, might as well get something out of it. So use this, because it's like they got the cloud delivery network, and they can have a private beta branch, which is what they gave to us. And we need to start the game. It is a development build of the game, but we need to start it and have it somehow connect to Insights. And to do that, you need to override the launch options of the game. And Steam actually allows you to do that. You can just right-click the game, go to Properties, General, Launch Options. And this allows us to set the launch parameters for profiling. And Matt will probably have some different parameters for the GPU profiling if you do that. But for CPU, these are the ones I used for Norse. The first one is the most important one. All of the other ones is something that I later on realized, okay, I need this. Okay, I need that. No, that's fine. Okay, I put it in the slides like this. Ooh, yellow. So, dash trace channel. This sets the trace channels used by Unreal Insights. If you're profiling a game, this is the only thing you need to do. Dash trace. If you do just dash trace, it will use the defaults. You're fine to start. And everything else is just quality of life that I'm going to talk about. It uses the default group by default, but you can also specify it. Like here, I say default, task. So I want all the default channels and also the task channel. The default as of Unreal 5.6 is CPU, GPU, frame, log, bookmark, screenshot, and region. We just added screenshot, for example. That was like in 5.5 or 5.4. So this keeps changing. I'm not going to say this is what it's always going to be like. We might add some more.
Yeah, just as a pro tip, you can put screenshots into traces so you don't have to just look at Rainbow Soup. You can look at the frame that actually happened.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Really nice. You can do it at important parts of the capture where you want to just give more context also. Like we're now in this mission, we're now in this screen. I also add task, which shows which tasks some threads are waiting on. And if you just have those threads, like I said, it will automatically connect to Unreal Insights frontend if it's running. Do I have it running? Can I show it to you?
I think you do.
I didn't. Well, let me open it quickly. I made a shortcut for it. It looks like this. there's no capture here. It will just show up here and it will say, I'm capturing. You can double click on it and it will open it. This is the Unreal Insights front end. It will already come with Unreal from the launcher, and it's just called unrealinsights.exe. It's in the Win64 folder. We don't have a shortcut for it, make your own, but you can also launch it directly from the editor, which is easier. All right, and then, this is why I turn on the task channel. Sometimes you have wait for task, and I'm like, what is it waiting on? And you'll go through, all the threads and see, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. This just kind of does it for you. So over here, you can see that we have this task that is taking 2.6 milliseconds. It was launched over here, but it had a prerequisite that was happening over here, and then something before that happened even lower, and then in the end, these were the two tasks that kind of like went like, if it's not done by now, we have to wait for it, which luckily didn't happen. There was a breathing room here where other things were happening. So this just makes it a lot easier to profile when it's like hitches and stuff like that. It does have a little bit of overhead, so that's why it's not enabled by default. But usually when I get a capture, something is already wrong. Something is already slow. So I'm like, okay, give it to us. Speaking of when something's already wrong, stat named events. You probably heard this a lot, and you might not know exactly what it is or what it does. So what it does is it activates tracing of additional named events. And basically it shows more functions in Insights. That's it. And the extra tracing has overhead, and I didn't want to say it has overhead without telling you how much. When I was profiling Norse, it added about 20% more overhead. So if you just want to know how fast your frames are going, you might not want this on. If you just want to see, like, are we on target or not? But if you're not on target and you want to know why, I actually would recommend turning it on. So I'll show you an example of where I think using stat named events is very useful, and that is here. This is off the capture already. In the upper image, you can see that this is without named events, which is by default. You can see that there's an animation blueprint body simple that takes about 100 microseconds, which is 0.1 millisecond, out of a frame time budget of 16.6 milliseconds for 60 frames per second. Sorry, I'm sounding like a doctor with all these numbers.
Yeah,
I need 10 cc stat.
There you go.
I might have discussed past and said, like, oh, this animation blueprint is like kind of expensive. Maybe you can fix it. Maybe it's just how long animation blueprints are. But then I turned on stat named events, and then I can actually see that this animation blueprint is doing 16 raycasts into the physics scene. This is happening for every single character. And I told them 16 is probably a lot. I actually checked it in Chaos Visual Debugger, which I'll talk about in a second.
Spoilers.
And there I could see they were all just casting right down to the earth. They were all the same one. So I'm like, you just have some redundancy there, fix it, and you'll save, like this animation blueprint will get rid of 90% of the frame time. Like,
huge.
Yeah. But this is basically what profiling is. You go like, why is this slow? That's why it's slow, and you fix it. Next one is exec commands, or CMDS. This is, again, like, this is optional, but what it does is it runs console commands after engine initialization. This is important because, well, I'll get to it later. I like to use stat unigraph, which enables frame timing, so it shows a graph for the last few seconds, which is quite nice because when you see a hit happens, you will see it go up and down, so you don't have to always be looking at the frame time. But then I also turn on stat FPS because it will, like, in addition to all the times, I want to just kind of have a rough idea of how much frames per second it is, and they will add the highest number over there where the red arrow is at. I also put on no verified GC. We got a development build, and it will spend a little extra time during garbage collection to verify the garbage collection. Make sure you're not doing anything stupid in your C++ code, which is really good because it will catch a lot of things and tell you, like, you're doing this wrong. But it also makes the garbage collector run about twice as long as it needs to be, and that shows us hitches in the capture. And then I keep clicking on them, going, there's a hitch. Oh no, it's the verifying. Let me just, like, not do that. Waste my time, so I turn it off. Then there's yeah, that's what and the garbage verification does not run in shipping builds, but yeah, it does slow down the GC. Then we have DP CVARs, and this stands for Device Profile CVARs. Basically, it's used to override any CVARs at launch time. Some of you might use exec commands to do that. I would recommend don't do that because it overrides CVARs before engine initialization, meaning you can override read-only CVARs. Why it's called Device Profile CVARs is because that's the first team that had the need to override CVARs. So they added it. But the thing is, if you override CVARs in any way, you can override any of them. So that just became the way to override CVARs. So it could have been called just dash CVARs, but they were the first team. So now you got a little history. Isn't that fun?
Science and history.
Science and history, right? I, in this case, added GC.verify assumptions on full PERT equals 0 because the no verify GC wasn't catching the full PERT one for some reason. Don't worry. I was like, that's stupid, and I fixed it myself. That's what doctors do. And then lastly, log commands. This is for basically just setting the verbosity of any log category. And I like to turn on log garbage to set it to verbose, because now every time a garbage collection happens, which is usually a source of stutters, is that it will show detailed stats on every single phase of the garbage collector. And also, more importantly, so I can tell them off or not, it will tell us how many U objects they had. That's very hard usually to see in a capture. And if they have like 100,000 and the garbage collector is taking a while, I can tell them like, something's weird. I don't know why it's taking this long. But if they have 500,000, 1 million, or even more, I'm like, you're doing something stupid. It wasn't in this case, luckily. And do note that when you make things verbose, printing takes a while. We need to flush it to the log, we need to write it to a file, and it might, show as hitches again, but just it will show in the profiler how much time it's taking to actually print stuff. And then lastly, handle ensure %, because they're heavily in development. They had a few ensures firing. Those are really hard to see in Insights because it doesn't show you that it's doing the stack walk and saving the dump. It took a whole second. And I was like, you have a whole second hits there. I don't know what it is. So I need to look into a sampling profiler to see what's happening. And then it's like, oh, it's just an ensure. So you can put handle ensure % to 0 to just turn them on, off. Turn them off, because I'm there to check the performance, not their stability. Default is 100%, set it to 0 to just turn them off. Okay. Recording, when I'm making a long capture and I want to give the studios a lot of feedback, I like to record them. I use OBS, which is free, and this with StatGraph will show you the spike, so you can kind of like start them both. It'll be a little bit offset, but now you can correlate them with each other, with the, I don't know. Insights team. Unreal Insights team, I'm not going to name you by name, but I would really like it if maybe a low resolution video could be embedded into the Insights capture, so I don't have to do this.
Pretty please.
Thank you.
I will bake you a cake.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I will also want to eat that cake. Sometimes Insights isn't enough. It's using telemetry. It only tells you what we want to tell you, or what you tell it to tell you. Sorry, it tells you what we tell you, not what we want to tell you. We want to tell you everything. But sampling profilers are for where it's just not enough. And there you capture, if you just need the symbols for the executable, and it'll show you literally everything that is happening on the CPU. It will capture the entire C++ stack thousands of times per second. There are many options for Windows profilers. A lot of them are like open source and stuff like that. They're mostly using the Windows telemetry framework, but they give you different UIs. Pix for Windows is free. It's what Microsoft basically has built for game developers. Mm-hmm. My favorite, which is screenshotted here, is Superluminal. It's actually quite cheap. I just bought a personal license because I love it so much. And if you are profiling on PlayStation, Xbox, consoles, mobiles, anything, VR headsets, XR, they will usually have specific profilers from the vendors. But you can also run this alongside Insights, so you can have data from both. So when Insights has a long hits, but you don't know why, just look at the sampling profiler. This is double the overhead, so already just when you know that there are performance problems like hitches. And we are actually working on sampling in Insights, and we just released 5.7 preview, right?
Preview 1, yep.
And it's in beta in 5.7, so you can actually turn it on there. Okay, I think we should just start looking at the capture. Ew. Where do we even start? Like, I'm not surprised many people look at it and think like, oh my God, this is not my job. I'll let a profile, let a doctor handle it. Don't worry, you can self-diagnose. Oh, I thought this was very clever. Okay.
Web UE.
I'll show you the scene that the profiler from. First, I'll show you the profile. Here we go. And like I said, it's rainbow puke. It looks very intimidating. And the scene that most of this is looking at is from here. It's a tutorial section where these two characters are running around and it's teaching you like, oh, press this button to do this, press that button to do that. Quite a simple scene. I'm now going to teach you how to start capturing. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So, this here, this is called the frames panel. And it has a lot of lines. It might not look like it, but if you zoom in with the scroll wheel, you can see these are actually columns like this. And
it's a bar graph.
Yeah, it's a bar. And every single one of these represents one frame in your game. So it's kind of like a timeline, but each bar, instead of representing like a set amount of time, it represents one frame. One frame can be like some milliseconds, even some seconds, even a minute. Like you can have one line that's like multiple minutes, and it will go up and into the sky. There are some lines over here. I don't know if you can see them. Can I make this? There's supposed to be lines from here. Yeah, why aren't I seeing them? Someone changed this. Okay. 16 milliseconds, 0.6 is 66666 is what you need to be under if you want to keep your game 60 frames per second or faster. Frame time of 33 is if you want to keep your game at 30 frames per second. So actually, I would personally recommend 60 frames. Yeah? Do you concur, Doctor?
I concur.
Concurred. Okay. If it goes over the red line, it's generally considered a frame drop or a hitch. Here you can see every single line that goes over is a frame drop or a hitch. And how I look at a capture is that also you can hold shift and scroll and it will like zoom in and out. So you can see some of these are like, here's one like really long, it's 10 seconds. Okay. And what I like to do is that I like to just click around. So here is a line that is too slow. I click it and it's showing me the frame. And I'm just going to scroll in here. Scroll in, scroll in, scroll in, scroll in. Scroll in, scroll in, scroll in. Yeah. You can see it's a little bit offset. I'll show you why. I'm going to click Other and Frame Track, or click R. And it's going to show you that it actually, if I click this again, it actually highlighted the rendering frame instead of the game frame. I usually focus on the CPU, so I'm going to right-click here and just turn off rendering frames. It's going to look similar.
Oh. Why wasn't that in the tips and tricks talk?
I didn't want to spoil it. So here, you can see that I clicked it now, and it will show you the frame time. It's the same as just clicking here and pressing Enter. It will select that time period. Now we know what the frame track does, and now here in the timing view, go away. This is also a time graph. It goes from left to right, show you every single function that was called. Like here in the base was engine loop tick. It's always running. But that function calls frame, and it starts at the beginning of it and ends at the same time. So the deeper we go, that's basically the functions they're calling. And then we have like from left to right how long it took. So here you can see world tick time. It first has a tick time here. This is actually the pre-physics and during physics. And then we have like blueprint latent actions and game thread tickable time. So basically, world tick time is calling these functions in a row. First tick time, then this one, then this one. How much time do I have left? Let me.
You're good.
Okay.
We'll be okay.
Yeah, 12. Yeah. I'm fine on time. I got 20 more minutes. We can just start scrolling in and see, like here, like usually what takes a lot of time is some things are ticking. And you can see here, pre-physics is taking 32.4 milliseconds. And it should be taking this much time. 16.6 milliseconds, then we'd be running at 60 frames per second. But luckily, we can just look into it and see what's happening. Remember, this is a hit, so this is not happening every single frame. So we see a lot of things are happening here. Let's scroll in more. We can see, let's go for the lowest hanging fruits first, the ones that are taking the biggest blocks. We can see that there's character movement components happening, but there's quite a few of them. Remember, there's only 2 characters in the scene. So I asked the team, why are there so many character components happening? And they said, oh, apparently there are other battles later on where you can meet enemies and they're just being simulated. So this is a super easy fix. I just told them, well, don't simulate them when they're not in the camera view. And they're like, easy, because they always have basically a checkpoint when the tutorial mission ends and the next one starts. Oh. So being able to just cut off this many is already saving us, 2 milliseconds. It means we're only spending half a millisecond instead of 2.5. Easy fix. You just have to see it, look at it. What's next? We can go here. We have some skeletal mesh components.
Oh, these were your ray casts, weren't they?
Exactly. So here we have 2 characters, and they're doing the 16 raycasts. And actually, let me see, didn't we have more of them? Like, if I double-click this, it's going to highlight them. So you can see elsewhere where they're happening. So here you can see they're here, and they're here. That's quite a lot of them. Let's see. One thing I really like doing in Insights is selecting time period, for example, 1 frame. And then if you just click once on a function, it will show you here, in this time period that you have, the blue, the 75 milliseconds, how many times it was called. So I can tell the team, you have 500 raycasts into the physics in a single frame.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's terminal, Doctor.
I believe it's an acute condition.
Did you just call me cute? Anyways, 222 microseconds inclusive time and then exclusive. So yeah, and also remember that there's also overhead like between them. So there's a little overhead like getting in and getting out and just blueprints and stuff. So easy way to get this rid of. And I just tell them that, and they just go like, oh yeah, of course. Like we should have seen this. Now you know it. So what's next? Okay, we go to the next slow game frame. Here we can see that there's set gender being called on 120. Oh, well, it's happening twice. So we can, let's just do, I don't know what best to count it, but we can divide it by 2. So it's like 60 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you're calling set gender on every single character in the entire level instead of just the ones that you're seeing. And they're like, oh, wow, okay, now we can just do just the 2 characters that are in the scene, which is like, wait, 37 milliseconds? Still quite much.
It's still a bit.
Well, so we can cut the frame time by this much, but it's still a really long frame. So now, actually, next thing we need to look into is why is this taking so much frame time? We can see here that it's taking the skeletal mesh component as soon as you're setting some animation on it. And sometimes that can be deferred because by default, Unreal, when it's taking skeletal mesh animations, they will do it on a worker thread. Asynchronous. It's not going to hit the game thread. But whenever you, for example, spawn an actor or change the animation, it might do it immediately so that you can see it immediately in the frame where you triggered it. And you don't often need that. You're setting these like during a fade in or fade out, stuff like that. And then I would just say, like, there's a property, which I mentioned in my great hits hunt, called tick skeletal animation
Defer
on actor construction or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
You can turn it off. So you can do that. Go to the great hits hunt presentation to see that, more about that. So, we can then cut it in half. And then also, like, this animation blueprint head takes 5.1 milliseconds. I actually did ask them about that. And they told us, oh, yeah, because we're using MetaHuman. And I was just like, okay, maybe MetaHuman is just that expensive. But then after that, I was like, wait a minute. They might be using MetaHuman LOD 0. Oh. Why should they not do that?
Well, if we go back to the frame, if you'll allow me, Doctor, if we go back to the frame, we don't necessarily need to be using the LOD 0 head for the characters that take up a 128th or even a 256th of the frame. They're quite small, so we could probably use a lower LOD or higher LOD of the head, so we don't have to initialize the big, heavy, expensive version until we get into the cinematic that I'll be talking about after this.
Thank you, Doctor. Yep. Also, I asked the MetaHuman team, and they told us, MetaHuman LOD 0 is actually made for like virtual production and Hollywood. So I'm like, for games, they actually do recommend going with at most LOD 1, and then just aggressively load down, and then you have fewer bones in the face and
less work to do.
Yeah. As a doctor, I usually don't recommend taking bones out of faces, but in this case, might help. I'm sorry.
I think that's plastic surgery.
Yeah, well, okay.
On my department.
Yeah. There's 2 more things I want to point out before I yield, Doctor. And one of them is here. You can see that, sure, like this is easy. We can see everything's happening in a frame, and then we just fix it. And whenever you see a big line like that as a frame drop, you click it, you figure out what's wrong, you get rid of it, the red line goes green, and you're fine. And then you click the next one, and you figure out what's wrong, and it goes down and goes green and gets fine. And when you do that with all of the lines, you have a 60 frames per second game with 0 stutters. Woohoo! And that's how you release a game with no stutters. You're welcome, game industry. I just said that so I could clip it for like LinkedIn and say it on its own.
Yeah, TikTok.
But let's go in here. End physics. What can we do about that? This is not our fault. This is the engine fault. It's being slow. And it's like here, waiting for tasks. Sometimes when you click on it, it's not going to show anything, but just click on the next task because that's usually lined up from it. So we're going to go down here, and I can see that physics is actually taking quite a long time during the frame. There's 2 things I would prescribe here. One is take from the pre-physics thread and put it in during physics. Because the physics has already kicked off then, and the longer the during physics takes, it will eat into the end physics that it needs to wait. But that's just applying a bandage to an infection.
Yeah.
You want to actually figure out why is your physics taking this long in the first place. Another place where physics shows up in this capture, if I zoom out a lot, is that we have these regions here that shows you something's being added to world. This is not loading the level, it is just initializing it, adding it. And this is taking 23 seconds. And usually for levels, I would say, Doctor, that's quite a long time.
That's quite a long time. Well, you know, it's amortized over a few frames.
It is.
So bad. But
it's not a single hitch.
But that's like, hey, we have a world partition cell, and it took 23 seconds to fully stream in that whole cell, which is too long.
Yeah. In our case, you can see here also I selected this time. You can see it in the frames you hear, the white section. Sorry, no, that's when I zoom in and out. So if I zoom in, you can see here, like this is this section. So now I'm going to zoom into a single frame, see what's happening. Okay, so there is a... There's supposed to be an add to world. Wait, did I scroll too far? I scrolled too far. Give me a second. There we go. Needs to be in the blue one. I'm looking for here. Yeah. Update level streaming. This is when the level streaming is being added. What it will do, it will incrementally add components to the scene for as long as it's allowed. You can set it yourself. You can set like, oh, only spend 1.5 milliseconds, and if it goes a little bit over, you know, that's just it. And
I
if we
believe
look at
the
it,
default is like 5 milliseconds.
It's less than this one for sure.
Well, they've got it tuned on this one, which is nice.
Probably because they had so many ticks, so yeah. But if we look here, you can see that every single component is creating physics state. Or if we go here, it's like creating physics, shapes, and actors. That's actually happening for all of them. And I think 90% of the frame time, like if we can also double click up to level streaming, zoom out a bit, and we can see the fat ones. Like, oh, there's a really fat one.
That's true.
This was taking 28 milliseconds. That is way over the frame limit.
Yeah. How does it do that, Ari?
Why is that happening? That is because the component updating does batches of like 3 or 4 components at a time. You can set that before checking the time. And then here, the reason is they have instant static mesh components that are just taking too long each. This is just because they have just too many instances, each of them with physics. So here we can see 26 milliseconds just being spent on adding physics.
Speaking of physics,
we need to look into physics, which brings me into the next point, which is the chaos visual debugger. This is the hidden world inside the body of the game.
the bones, if you will.
The bones, yes. You can actually view that with an X-ray called Chaos Visual Debugger. The complete physics scene, the state of it, all physics queries for each frame during a recording. It's super powerful. It shows you literally everything you would have wanted to know and more. And it's very easy to open. You just go into Unreal, it's Tools, Debug, and Chaos Visual Debugger. And if you have a package development build, you can do these console commands, and it will create a file which you can then feed into Chaos Visual Debugger. And I actually have it running over here. Let's look at the physics scene. Here we have the training area that I showed you in the video. I can even show you here, like the representative. So here's the 2 people, and here you can see there are 2 physics capsules. In Chaos Visual Debugger, you can show geometry flags, simple and complex. Usually they're both on by default, and it shows you both. And it's like, well, the simple one is only what is used for collisions when objects are moving. They'll only query against the simple. The complex one is used for your scene queries, but the complex one still needs to be loaded. So that will show during load time and during raycasts. So they'll be slower if the complex scene is slower. But the simple is for like when you see the physics is taking 5 milliseconds, it's because of the simple one. So let's look over here. Okay, the ground is quite complicated. I would say this can be simplified. There's a bunch of rocks here, but it's not looking horrible. Like the trees are capsules. Very nice.
Yeah, not too bad.
That's good. As a doctor, I'm like, walk it off. Take an ibuprofen. But
Whoa.
there, here in the distance, we have the whole town loaded.
How'd that get there?
Yeah. And if we look into it, well, we can see that the structures are kind of like, they're kind of dense and complicated. And for a top-down game, you don't really need that. I would say like just replace all of these houses with like blocks. I actually just learned what, like, so you have a cube, and when you, yeah. I'm excited about this because I learned a new word.
Yeah.
It's a clinical word. When you have a cube, but it's not equal on all sides, it's a cuboid. Cuboid! I've been looking forward to saying that because it's a really cool word and it's fun to say.
It's a great word.
So, replace this whole building
With a cuboid.
Thank you, doctor.
You're welcome, doctor.
And that will immediately start making this faster, less things you need to put in. Also, we look at the wall over here. You can see, these are actually these are polygons. These are complex physics. Like these are triangles we need to simulate against to see if it's like overlapping or something like that. And like here's just way too many shapes. They can't even get up there. So just looking at the world allows you to see really low-hanging fruits. Like all of these can be removed and just put some cuboids in there and stuff like that. But the loading time was still very, very slow. And like this maybe wouldn't exactly be the source of it. So now let's switch over to the complex view mode. And now we can see a grim view. This is the instant static mesh component. Yeah. The mic is not capturing it, but there's a lot of murmur and
there's a lot of
in the audience. Mm-hmm. This is why it took 20 milliseconds to put one instant static mesh component. So this is the moss. There's a tree here. We have every leaf, but we're not doing anything to find that. Mm-hmm. In the wall, there are these wooden dowels for every nail. You can click it. And this is not a capsule. This is polygon. The houses, like, look at this moss here.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
The thing to keep in mind with complex collision is you do sometimes need it, right? If I want to do bullet traces or something like that, I definitely need to have high fidelity. Oh, it's our favorite. This is the year of the fruit stand.
I've been seeing this in many games, so I don't want anyone to feel bad about it if this is in your game. You don't have to raise your hand. I know most of you would. But there's a reason why in my Hits Hunt presentation, I gave an example of proxy physics being like, take, for example, a box of fruit and just make it one cuboid instead of having all the fruits in there. And like, this is complex physics. And you can see even the stem here. And there's even like this box of cabbage heads. There's this box of onions. How deep does it go? Yeah, okay, it goes all the way down.
And the complex fission, the complex collision mesh is created from the LOD chain of your static mesh. And if you've got nanite in your scene, or if you're using nanite, you have fallback meshes. You do still need to set the number of LODs and let it auto-generate. Otherwise, you could end up with your whole nanite mesh being complex collision, which is very, very expensive, both in terms of memory.
You might think, oh my God, this is going to be so much work to fix. How have they done all of this so inefficiently? But I don't want to knock them down because A, this is very common, because B, this is the default workflow in Unreal. Every single mesh has complex physics and simple physics enabled by default. And if you don't manually set the complex physics, it's going to use the highest LD or the mesh itself if you're not using nanite. And the easiest way to get around this is going into your project settings and use the default physics profile to be use simple as complex. Yes. Then all of this will disappear. And it's just one single setting that didn't enable, and this is how much it's costing them. So just now by taking that one ibuprofen, all of this is gonna go away, and then they can start optimizing the simple physics. So this was fun, and also, but you notice there's some blue things here also. Those are non-static geometry, and when those are loaded in, they actually check for overlaps by default. And you don't the overlaps checking, that's for not for us. Engine doesn't require it. That's for you, in case you want to listen to the event and react to it. So, well, number one, just make it static. We skip it. Number two is that you can turn off overlaps for non-static objects. Oh, here's a tree with every leaf. Mm-hmm. And we can also go to the tutorial area.
Very complicated.
Ay, caramba. So, okay, now this is explaining. Luckily, like I said, simple fix. Now they know, and they can fix it. I think that's it for me.
Great. So I'm looking forward to talking about GPU profiling, if you'll allow me.
Doctor.
So I am a tech artist. I love looking at graphics, GPU profiling, and it can also be as daunting, if not more daunting, than using Unreal Insights. And so I want to show you what that looked like. Unfortunately, I don't have a live example, so we're going to go through some PowerPoint slides. So GPU capture profilers is what we're going to look at. They capture a single frame from the GPU and all of the resources and instructions that was needed by the GPU to render that frame, and we can play it back. There's timelines and really, really, really deep inspection. As a tech artist, I don't need to get super duper deep, but it's going to give me more information about what was rendered in the frame than Unreal Insights, right? Unreal Insights is kind of giving me the high level passes. This is going to show me every single thing. There are a bunch of platform-specific options for this, including, so for Windows, we might use something like RenderDoc or WinPix. On PlayStation, you'd be using something called Razor. Xbox, you'd be using Pix again. Android, something like NVIDIA Insights. These are all some of the different options. So let's talk about the setup that I had for GPU profiling, because I needed to do this on an Xbox Series X, because our workstations that we use are not representative of commercial hardware. They're very powerful, which is great. So I really like doing GPU profiling on a platform, a dev kit, target hardware, so that I can kind of know how things are actually going to perform out in the real world. I was using a development build because that's going to give me all the information that I need. I was running it at 4K because we're all running at 4K these days, and I was using Pix for that. So let's take a look at Pix real quick. You pop it open, there's not a lot here, but you have to connect to the dev kit. So when you connect to the dev kit, you go, all right, let me connect to that Xbox that is connected to my computer, and it's going to bring up this window. So I've already got the game up and running. I used remote viewer to get to the point that I needed to, and then I just hit this GPU capture option, which brings me to this, which is fine, but I don't have a whole lot of information here. What I need to do is replay that frame on the Xbox with all of the bells and whistles hooked up to it to give me all of the juicy details. So I click that button there and it runs, and now I have my own timeline view. This is one frame. So what we're looking at here is the compute pipe down here, and we're looking at the main pipe up top. And then what I can see here is the EOP to EOP duration in nanoseconds. And I can see that took 29,800,862 nanoseconds to render that frame. That's how much time it took the GPU to do all of this work. So that's about 30 milliseconds. I also have some console variables that I set when I'm doing some GPU profiling. I think most of these are a little belt and suspenders, but I like to talk about them anyways. The first is r.rhi set GPU capture options 1, which does a few different things. It adds draw events. It enables show material draw events so that you can see like the name of the material in the GPU profiler. This is also really important if you're on 5.4 and below, you need to explicitly enable r.nanite.show mesh draw events so that you get the names of the nanite shading bins as well. And it's also going to do r.rdg events 3, so we get all of the event and pass names. I think sometimes we have a way to detect if we're doing a GPU capture and enable this automatically. This does have some overhead, much like stat named events. So the thing that I'm doing here is not necessarily how, is the game running at 30 frames per second? I want to figure out what's taking the most amount of time. I need a little bit of extra information.
And you're still able to profile without these, right?
Yes. Yeah, you absolutely can. But this next one is really important because on our modern consoles, we have dynamic resolution. And that's great, but that means that the performance of the game is actually going to show up in the size of the back buffer, the internal resolution, and not the millisecond count. So if I have dynamic resolution turned on, I'm always going to get a little close to 30 milliseconds, which isn't quite what we want. So I want to see those millisecond times. So I set r.dynamic.res.test screen percentage, and I set that to about 75. Because that's kind of the number that I think is a really good target. And then if you hit your frame rate in most situations at 75% screen percentage, then you have some dynamic resolution buffer in case things get a little intense.
Yeah, so you shouldn't be relying on the dynamic resolution during development. You should be setting it to something, and then if it gets slower, optimize it, because it's going to hide the symptoms if suddenly just start lowering the resolution.
Yeah, so the first round I went capturing all of these things. I was like, man, they're running at 30 across the board. Things are great. Oh, right. Dynamic resolution. And then the other one that I do is r.rdg.async compute 0. And this is going to take all the stuff that we put into a parallel thread and put it on the main thread just so that there's nowhere to hide. And I know exactly how long all of these different things took. So we had some test scenarios that we were provided with. I think this is just a generally good practice of like, hey, be consistent in your performance testing. So we had save files. So I just go to the save file, do a capture. I had cinematics. This one was a little trickier. Basically, I'd replay the cinematic. I'd play the cinematic with stat unit graph turned on, figure out kind of where in the cinematic things got really expensive, and then replay the cinematic, wait till I get to that point, and hit the GPU capture. Pro tip, if you want to add something to your game to make this easier, maybe a console command to go to a specific point in the cinematic would be very helpful. Speaking of console commands that are very, very helpful, bug it go. You type bug it, and it'll print out a string called bug it go, and then the position and rotation of the camera, so you can go back to that position, makes repeatability really, really powerful. So let's really quickly look at the results. I had 4 different setups that I was looking at. They were all running anywhere between 33 and, that was on the high end, 48 milliseconds. But again, this was like dynamic res 75%, epic scalability settings. So we were targeting 33. So like, this isn't that bad. This is, I would call this in the realm of possibility. The top issues that we had were Niagara Niagara GPU compute was doing a lot of work, which was weird. There were some nanite rasterization issues, of course. Overlapping lights was a really interesting one, and I want to show you how that shows up in a GPU capture. And after DOF translucent materials.
What's DOF?
Depth of field.
Oh.
Thank you, doctor. So my top tips when we're doing GPU performance captures, when we're doing insights captures. Step 1, look at the big number. Scroll in, you'll find a big number, and then you have to figure out why that number is big. The next one is looking for lots of little numbers. That's another form of big number. And finally, sometimes there are numbers where they shouldn't be, and we can find that in the GPU captures. So an example of one big number, does anybody want to pick out which one big number that I'm going to look at first? What do you think, Doctor?
Well, there is rendered third lighting. There's diffuse interact with lumen there.
I'm not that worried about that
geometry.
Yep. So the one that I wanted to look at right now is this one right here. So this is in the translucency pass, which is a bit strange to me because I would expect that to be, I don't know, 1 to 2 milliseconds. But like this one specific draw call was taking almost a millisecond. And if you combine that with the other particle effect, a different particle system that was rendering this, it's almost a whole millisecond to render this. I'm like, why is it taking so long? Well, it turns out that we are running in after depth of field, which is running at a full 4K. So even though I set the dynamic resolution to 75%, we're rendering more pixels. We're rendering more translucent pixels for this effect, and it's chimney smoke. That doesn't need to be after depth of field, right? So we can switch it to before DOF. Pro tip, this is your prescription for this one. Go look at all of your translucent materials and see if they need to be after DOF or before DOF.
Is there a default in Unreal?
The default is after DOF.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So there was another big number. And this one, this has actually come up in some of our consultations this year, is virtual shadow map projection mask bits. And it turns out that this does not really tell you what is happening here. And it's actually, this number is the number of lights that were affecting the number of pixels. So if you have a lot of overlapping lights, overlapping shadow casting lights, that's how you're going to find it, is this number. So when you go into Pix, one of the deep introspection things that you can do is get it to rerun the vertex shader. So the vertex shader of a spotlight is going to give you the cone of the spotlight. So you can click onto the draw call, click into the resources, click on that vertex shader, and you're like, oh, that's a perfectly normal sized light. This one isn't. And I think there were a few of these, and what was interesting is like this didn't really show up in the cost of lighting. It really showed up in the virtual shadow map projection mask bits cost. So this one, super simple. Check your light complexity view mode. These were we were chatting with the team, and it turns out that these were kind of like GI fake bounce lights that didn't really need to be casting shadows. You can also do lighting channels, make sure that we're locking everything down, and of course, keep your attenuation radii reasonable. There were lots of little numbers, and this one was really fun. I'd never seen this before. So in the timeline of this trace, we see the blue are all of the draw dispatches and so on and so forth, but then there's that gray section all the way back here, and it turns out that that gray section is actually a lot of little draws. And I asked the team about this because I'd never seen this before. It showed up in visibility commands, and you're like, oh, visibility commands, that must be
occlusion or something,
yes,
right?
Very, very nice. No, it wasn't occlusion because Niagara GPU compute dispatches are happening as part of that visibility commands pass. And it turns out that what this was they were using fluid flux for their water, and there were a bunch of Niagara systems that were reading the water height from the GPU back to the CPU so they could play other effects. There were like 96 of these, and that totaled about 2 milliseconds.
So that's the ocean around the island.
That was the ocean around the island. And if we go back to the frame, I don't see any ocean. So there's a few different things you could do about that. You could use like the significance manager. You could also use, there's a concept called like systems as a service. And you use data channel, you have one Niagara system and you use data channels to trigger a bunch of particle effects around the world. I've got documentation on that on my link tree. Come see me after class.
Oh, Doctor, there is one more also that I would heavily recommend. Is using world partition to unload cells that aren't near the camera view. Yeah. I asked the team about why they're not using world partition. The thing is because every other level in this game is very small. They didn't need it, except for the tutorial where they have this like island that kept growing and growing, and they kept adding more and more tutorial things. So it was one of those things that started off fine and then it grew outside that scope. So they were like, what can we do? Do we have to turn on world partition for the entire game? And I told them, no. You can actually turn on world partition for only that level if you want.
Yeah, very handy. Finally, there were some numbers where they shouldn't be, and I asked the team about this because this is not finally. I'm so sorry. I asked the team about this because I was seeing a bunch of nanite programmable rasterization in the custom depth pass. So I was like, well, that's very interesting. What are we using custom depth for here? And they said, oh, it was an outline shader. Or they were using something for an outline shader, and it turns out they didn't actually need any of that stuff rendering into custom depth.
Oh.
Easy fix, just turn it off. So that one was easy. This one, okay, I promise this is the last one.
We do have plenty of time, Doctor. There's just lunch after us.
Oh, fantastic, Doctor. I don't have lunch after this. So it turns out what happened, this is a fairly common problem. Nanite, doing last gen techniques and turning on nanite for foliage can be quite expensive. And the nice thing about it is it's usually a few materials. So you can really target the fix for this, right? We've got the grass clumps. We've got a couple of versions of grass clumps. We've got like black alder tree twigs. So it's really easy for us to focus our efforts. And this is going to show up in nanite vis buffer. It's also going to show up in custom depth, and it's going to show up in shadow depths. So anything we can do to affect one of these materials is going to have added benefits throughout the frame. Now, here's the thing about foliage rasterization. Rasterizing masked materials with nanite is really expensive, and it doesn't turn off. So like if you use fully opaque trees and you have WPO disable distance, eventually your trees fall back to fixed function rasterization, which is really, really fast. But masked materials means you can never fall back to fixed function because it's also programmable rasterization. So the good news is we've added a checkbox.
Oh. Checkbox for everything.
There's a checkbox for everything. So what we've heard from some of our licensees, people who have already implemented this, is we think the best way to do the Simon Barrel nanite foliage, if we just have a few things, if we're doing last gen techniques, we closely crop our masked materials around the shape of our leaf. And then we use the pixel programmable disable distance to turn that masked material into an opaque material at a certain distance. Because it turns out that if I've got the shape of this leaf and I take the shape of that leaf and then I zoom really, really far out, like I bet nobody in the back of the room knew that I changed the slide. So you use that pixel programmable disable distance to switch to the opaque version of the leaf, which is the rough shape of the leaf once you can't tell the difference, right? Super handy. And then, so like we might have polygons that look like this, which is very, very handy. And then, of course, we're going to do our WPO disable distances, and we're going to keep our world position offset calculations as cheap as humanly possible. It's panning texture with a vertex alpha. Some of the techniques like Pivot Painter, where we're doing multiple joint transforms per vertex, is going to be kind of too expensive. And we found from multiple licensees that this has proven to be pretty effective for their performance. And I think that is all I had in my chart, Doctor. Shall we do the group selfie?
Yes, that's a good one. I am so glad that so many of you, we filled the room, are all here just wanting to know how to profile your games and make them better. Can we get the lights on for the entire room? I would like to take a selfie with all of you and Matt. Matt, maybe you can come here like a little bit more in front. So
Yes,
we can
of
catch
course.
you.
Yep.
And I'm going to get you all to say, should we just say the classic hi from Stockholm?
Hi from Stockholm,
I think
yes.
that's good. So let's practice it. I'll go 3, 2, 1, and you all go hi from Stockholm. 3, 2, 1.
Hi from Stockholm.
Cool. I want to see even more hands in the air. I want to hear a little bit more screaming because that was just loud talking. Let me see. Video, selfie. Okay. Oh my God, I even get all of us. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Hi from Stockholm.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Good job, Doctor.
Good job, Doctor.
Good afternoon and welcome to High Performance Telemetry with Trace, drinking from the fire hose. Thank you all for showing up on the last session of the last day. I hope you're full of energy. But do remember, we get to go to a party very soon, so hang in there. My name is Johan Berg. I work at the Insights team at Epic Games. Me and my colleagues work on Tracelog, Unreal Insights, and lately also Spatial Profiler for UEFN. We call this talk tracing or drinking from the fire hose because if you enable all the tracing in the engine, it's truly like trying to drink from a fire hose. So it can easily get out of hand. So how do you use tracing without being completely overwhelmed? So hopefully you'll leave today with a feeling that you've gotten an introduction into tracing in Unreal Engine and a bit of best practices and performance advice when doing tracing. So this presentation is in three main parts. First, whirlwind tour of Trace, like a high-level overview of how it works. Then we'll talk a little bit about how you get the most out of tracing, what we ship with the engine. And finally, a part about how you can make tracing for your game, instrumenting your own code or even making own custom events. But let's start with a short introduction into how tracing in Unreal Engine works. There are three main components in tracing. Tracelog, which is the runtime library that is used to log structured events into a data stream. We have trace analysis, which is the module responsible for parsing this trace stream and providing an interface to anyone who wants to consume the data. And finally, we have Unreal Insights, which is our main application for visualizing the data. So if we go into the Tracelog module, its main purpose is to log structured events in runtime. We use a method to statically define the shape of the data or shape of the events. And it produces a data stream of self-describing a self-describing data stream. The self-describing part means that the events start by describing how they look, and we can parse it from there. That makes it a lot easier to maintain backwards compatibility, and you can change the fields of the events without invalidating previous traces. You do have to make sure you analyze them correctly, though. More on that later. But Trace is designed for high throughput and minimal performance impact. Events are emitted per thread into a buffer, so there's no inter-thread locking or anything. We don't have a worker thread which collects data from the producing threads, compresses it, and sends it out to where you want the data. We also have a feature called tail buffering, which is a fixed size circular buffer. And this is quite useful for doing ad hoc profiling, for example, where you're not tracing currently to a file, but you can at any point start a new file and you will get the contents of the tail buffer. The tail buffer is also used for what we call snapshots, where we take the contents of the tail buffer and just write out a burst of data in what's in the tail buffer, basically. So this is just a brief overview of what the trace format looks like. So you have a stream of packets where each packet contains events from a single thread. We also have some kind of pseudo threads where we have important events, and also the schema is also emitted on a separate pseudo thread. Each packet contains a stream of events, and they appear in the order they were emitted on that thread. And each event is a short, a small header with a type ID, an optional serial number, and timestamp. And then the fixed size fields, followed by an optional data blob for variable size data. And there we store, for example, strings or other non-schematized data. So you can output trace in a few different ways. You can write to network, to a local or remote server. And we ship Unreal with Unreal Trace Server, which is a companion service that records traces and also acts as a store for whoever wants to consume traces. But you can also write directly to a file or provide your own writing function and write into memory or do whatever you want with the data. Unreal Insights is a standalone application. That's our main way to visualize the data. So Insights contain both a session browser, where you can browse all their recorded sessions, and also the actual visualizer tool. It's also we also have a way to embed parts of Insights into the editor for certain tools. Unreal Insights also has a plugin system where you can register your own plugins. And the way we handle analysis in Insights or in trace analysis is that we have a system of analyzers which get raw data from the data stream, and they push data into providers which act as a way for the UI to feed the UI with data. And a plugin can provide both analyzer, provider, and custom UI as well. So what can be traced from the engine? Output from the engine is controlled via something we call channels. One channel controls one or more event types. Out of the box, we provide channels in a variety of different categories. We have the performance channels, we have a set of memory channels, a set of channels that provide extra context, and we also have some system-specific channels for audio, animation, etc. I will go into detail into what these different channels do in a moment. So we have lots of channels, but we also have presets, which is a way to organize channels. And we try to make them kind of scenario-based. We have the default channel, which is perhaps not ideally named because it's not a scenario, but it's the default channel is basically a reasonable set of for performance capture, and has quite low impact in terms of performance hit, but it gives you a reasonable way to start looking at performance. We also have the memory preset, which provides detailed memory capturing. I'll go into details what that means eventually. But you can also create your own custom presets, and they are can be defined in INI files, so you can easily share between the team in your team. So you can provide a way to capture performance in a certain way if you want. So let's talk a little bit about the different performance channels we have out of the box. So we have the most common one, perhaps, is the CPU channel, where you have the instrumented scopes and functions. We have the GPU channel. If you went to Luke's talk earlier today, you should have seen more about all the information that goes into that channel. We have the regions channel, which is used for measuring longer periods of activity. That can span multiple frames, for example. The frames channel provides timings for game and rendering frame times. We also have counter channel, which is like a generic way to trace values and plot them over time. And finally, we have the stats channel, which basically mirrors the stats system in the engine, and you should You're probably already aware of what goes into that. Then on to the memory channels, and they are obviously for tracking what your game is allocating. So if you've looked into memory performance, you're probably familiar with low-level memory tracker, or LLM. So the memtag channel traces out the LLM categories. And then we have the mem-alloc channel, which is a complete history of alloc, realloc, and free events in your game. To help that, we also have the call stack channel, which provides call stacks for each allocation event, and also a way to attach additional metadata to allocations when we can tie an asset, for example, to a specific allocation. The context channels are a way to correlate what happens in your game with what you're seeing in the profile. We have the log channel, which obviously traces out all the log events, but we also have the bookmarks, which provides points where something interesting happens in your engine or in the game. And the bookmarks are also exposed into blueprints, so you can easily emit your own bookmarks to mark interesting events. We have the screenshot channel, so you can embed screenshots into the trace file. And the task channel, which provides relationship information from the task graph. So how do we control trace? We have a few different ways to control trace. One is the session front end in Unreal Insights, or trace control as we call it. This can control trace via message bus. So any process that you start from the editor will automatically have message bus enabled and enables control via this tab. If you're starting from command line, you can still enable message bus by using dash messaging. There are other ways to control trace, of course. You can use the in-game console, which have commands for start, stop, trace, enable channels, so on. There are command line arguments, which are useful when you want to capture trace events from the start of the process. And the command line arguments are also required when you're doing detailed memory tracing. We have a control widget in the editor to trace from the editor itself. And you can also control trace from a programmatic interface. It's called ftrace auxiliary, which exposes all the controls as well. So how can we get the most out of tracing? How do we trace with like minimal memory footprint and performance impact? So to understand that, we need to take a look at the performance characteristics, but future slides will kind of break down a little bit about the different channels, what performance impact they have. But it's also important to look at the overall performance, or the overall bandwidth. And the channels are the main knobs we can use to control the bandwidth we're emitting. So you have to be mindful about how much data you're sending out if you're tracing across the network, or if you're tracing to disk, for example. If the worker thread cannot keep up with the amount of data you're tracing, the unsent data will start to consume memory. So we use a block pool for storing trace data temporarily. But if that reaches the configured limit, then the application will halt, and there's currently no graceful degradation or dropping of data. So that's why it's important to understand a little bit about the bandwidth of what you're tracing. Yes. the worker thread, as I said, its main job is to shuffle data around, compress it, and send it to I/O. So the more data you send, the more work that worker thread will have to do. So for systems that maybe don't have that many cores, it might be useful to understand that if you're tracing more, the worker thread will consume more and perhaps even skew your performance data, as one thread will be busy just compressing trace data. Before we go into the different channels, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of events that we have in tracing. And because they have an impact on memory footprint and analysis speed. The most basic event is the normal event, and they have there are no guarantees about in which order they are processed, except for they are processed in the order that they are emitted on that thread. If you need synchronization between threads, say you're correlating some event on one thread against another thread, then you need to use synchronized events. And synchronized events attaches a global ID to each event. That means the analysis must kind of read ahead all the time, or potentially read ahead until it finds the next expected serial number. Finally, we have the important events. So a common pattern with tracing is that you have an event that references a previous event. An example is the timers, for example, for CPU, where we emit one timer specification, which contains like the name of the timer, which file it is in, which line it is in, and you don't want to emit that for every time that you enter that scope, for example. So we emit that once, and then we reference that event in all the timing events. But since we can start and stop tracing at any time, we need to always include that specification event. So for that, we have important events, and important events are kind of kept in memory for the entirety of the process lifetime. And any time you start a new trace, you emit the important events again. So they are kept in memory during the entire process lifetime. If you have data that can be easily enumerated, we have a workaround for avoiding important events, which is called like an on-connect callback. So you get that anytime you start a new trace, and then you can emit events without using the important event type. But that only works for data that you can easily enumerate. So it doesn't work in all cases. Okay, so I think we are prepared to go into a little bit about the performance impact of the different channels. So the CPU profiler, which is the most common one, channel we use, is generally very cheap, especially when you're using static strings or fname based time names or scope names. We have this stat named events argument that you can add, which adds all the scoped static or so all the scoped timers as events as well. This adds quite a lot of events, I should say, and quite a lot of them are overlapping with the regular tracing events. So it's something that you should enable when you think you need more data, but you should start without using stat named events is our recommendation. As I said, like prefer statically named scope names. You can use dynamic names, of course, but you should be aware that they are a little bit more expensive since we need to track them in a tmap. Tmap is per thread only, so there's no synchronization, but there is still some overhead if you're using a lot of dynamic scope names. one thing I want to call out is try to avoid using dynamic names that have like an index value in it, especially if it's unbound index or a frame number, which we have seen. For each new frame, you would create a new important event, so you would continuously grow the size of the important events. If you need frame correlation, use the frames channel instead, because that is much cheaper and is supported in Insights as well to correlate with frames. All right. So the memory channels, the memtag channel that I talked about before, it's quite low overhead to use that, except for the LLM tracking itself, which is obviously has some overhead. But it basically traces out all the LLM categories once per frame. So it's quite low bandwidth in that sense. But the downside of LLM tracking is that you only get per category. You don't really understand what is actually allocating memory. So to get that level of understanding, you probably want to use the memalloc channel. And this gives full details. The downside is it has quite a lot of overhead and it requires a lot of bandwidth. This is mainly because we send call stacks for each allocation event. You can disable call stacks, but then you have limited use of the allocation data itself without any call stacks. We have the metadata and asset metadata as well, and that attaches additional data around allocations. And that's where, for example, when we can correlate a allocation with a specific asset, we can add that. But it only captures allocations that happen during the loading of the asset. And it doesn't capture shared memory usage like pools, for example. It would be quite unfair to associate a given asset with whenever a pool size increases, for example, since it's reused. It adds some additional bandwidth, but it's not terribly high, I would say. Okay, so the context channels, the task channel provides a great insight into how the task system performs, and it's great to tracking down stalls and problems with tasks. But it also has quite a lot of overhead because we need to trace a lot of data since we're executing lots of tasks. So our recommendation is to enable the task channel when you're actually looking at a problem that relates to tasks. The screenshot channel is a great tool to add some additional context, but it's not suited to take screenshots every frame, for example, since it takes full-size screenshots and it kind of blocks the game thread while it does that. Log channel is also great for additional context, but do be aware of log spam, which can grow the trace stream a bit. So some general advice when profiling. Decide on a scenario upfront. Once you've decided on a problem that you want to look at, try not to mix scenarios. We've seen, for example, people using detailed memory tracing together with performance tracing, but the detailed memory tracing will likely skew your performance data quite a lot. So it doesn't really make sense to trace both at the same time. And also don't use channels that you don't know what they do. I've had several licensees ask me or send me traces where they have, for example, the object channel, which is only usable for the rewind debugger. So it doesn't provide anything for a performance capture, for example. And finally, use presets. It's a great way to share your profiling setup with your teammates, and it's easily shareable. Something about limitations on different platforms. We support tracing on a bunch of platforms, all the desktop platforms, console, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch 1 and 2, and mobile platforms. So all these targets have quite different limitations. So when you're tracing, it's good to be aware of if there's network limitations or disk I/O limitations. For example, if you're tracing a lot of data to disk while you're loading data from disk at the same time, you will skew your performance data and potentially invalidate what you're measuring. Also be aware that there is some differences in how the detailed memory tracing works on different platforms. It's not always possible to capture all the data we can on desktops, for example. But sometimes we also have additional information on platforms. For example, we have page swap information on Android, which is useful for that platform. All right, so the last part of my presentation is a little bit about how you can use tracing in your project. So first part is about instrumenting your own code, and that's maybe the first step that you want to take. So you can, of course, use all the built-in instrumentation, and it's available in the core profiling debugging directory usually. All the engine macros are already instrumented. For example, Quickscope is available, can output trace data if you're using stat named events, but we also have the specific trace macros to trace scopes. Again, prefer static strings if you can. Use dynamic strings when you need, but prefer static strings. And you can use the regions as well for longer spans. One nice feature that we have is to use conditional timers. So in this example here, I've used a conditional timer to trace out the scope if the items to init array has some items. So you can see in the picture below that it shows up there as a parent to the parallel for loop, which can be nice to see. All right, so you can also, of course, make your own custom events. You would need to implement your own events, of course, but likely also a custom analyzer. I'm not going to go into super much detail into this because Sebastian already has a talk about this called Extending Unreal Insights for Devs. One tip that I have, though, is try to use the existing components when possible. For example, you can create your own custom event and analyzer, but try to feed it into the existing timing provider. So in that case, you can get like the visualization part for free. It will just show up in the regular Insights timeline. So that's a nice way to get custom stuff, but get the UI for free. But if you have very specific things you want to visualize in Insights, you can, of course, implement your own custom UI as well, which can be quite powerful. If you are looking for custom events, here are some tips on how to make it performant. So try to think about bandwidth for your events. This is especially important if you have very high frequency events. use what you know about kind of the underlying data. Do you know that a certain value is just going to be between 0 and 256, and you can use a smaller integer, for example. Deduplicate data when possible. This is, as I said, like a reoccurring pattern with tracing. So you emit stuff that is reoccurring, you emit it once, and reference it later. If you're familiar with databases, that's just normalization, I guess. Also be mindful about locking and containers. If you have tracing events, you want to make sure that you can emit them from any thread if possible. All right, so that's all I had. Thank you for listening, and let's see you at the party.
Thank you for joining. My name is Luke Thatcher. I'm a principal rendering programmer on the RHI team at Epic. And this is our session on the new GPU profiler and RHI submission pipeline. So this session will be one that's in kind of two halves, really. First section, I'm going to talk about what we've done to the new GPU profiler in Unreal 5.6 and the improvements that we've made there. And then in the second half, I'll be going over like a deep technical dive into the RHI submission pipeline. This was something that we shipped in 5.5, but we haven't kind of publicly spoken about yet. And just for anyone who's curious, RHI stands for Render Hardware Interface. It's one of those acronyms that we throw around quite a lot, but we don't tend to define very much. So yeah, the RHI is the module of the engine that sits between the renderer and the GPU kind of platform API, and we implement one of these per platform, and it's what provides the platform support for graphics. But before we dive into that, we'll just have a quick recap on GPU queues, as this will set some of the scene for some of the changes that we've made in the profiler. Some of this you may already be familiar with, but it's probably worth just having a quick refresh. So for the best part of a decade now, GPUs have had multiple queues. These queues you can kind of think of as almost like hyper-threading on a CPU, and multiple threads on a CPU, in that we have kind of two or more independent queues of work that the application can submit to. And they run concurrently, and they sort of intelligently share the execution resources on the GPU. Typically, there's always a single graphics queue, and the graphics queue can access the full traditional rasterization pipeline, so depth of stencil testing, vertex pixel shaders, all that stuff. But it can also run compute jobs. And then you typically have either one or more compute queues that can only run compute shaders. And of course, these jobs, the jobs submitted to these queues can run concurrently with each other, but that's not always desirable. We tend to have jobs that create data on one pipe and need to be consumed by another pipe. So we need some way of synchronizing these two pipes together. And that's where we get fences. So fences are kind of synchronization primitives that are used to prevent one queue from advancing any further until the signal has come from the other queue that was producing that data. So in this case, those three compute jobs on the right-hand side on the compute queue can't start work until the graphics queue has completed that first piece of work in the upper left. And then we get that signal of fence A, and then the wait for fence A to allow everything to advance. And then coming back the other way, those last three jobs on the graphics queue can't start until that signal has passed on the compute queue. And one thing that's interesting to note about this is that because these waits stall the queues, you can end up with execution kind of pauses, and you can see that kind of like in the on the left-hand side, where there's that gap just before the wait for fence B. So because the queues are synchronizing with each other, you can end up with these kind of bubbles on the queues, and that's something important to be aware of when we're looking at the profiler. So moving on to the actual profile itself and the improvements that we've made in 5.6. Hopefully you're all familiar with these tools. They've been around for a while now. The three main components of the GPU profiler are stat GPU, the profile GPU command, and Unreal Insights. In 5.6, we've rebuilt these from the ground up to be based heavily on our RHI breadcrumb system. I'll touch on what our RHI breadcrumb system is further on in this talk. And one of the key things here is that it now all draws from a unified data source. So all of these tools now agree with each other. Perhaps previously you might have noticed that some of the stats were like off by fractions of milliseconds. Because they're all drawing from the same information now, they all agree with each other. Okay, so stat GPU. This is a tool that you can use to give you kind of like a live overview of the GPU work that's running in the frame. You can bring this up on console, you can bring this up in the editor. Each one of the lines here is a single stat, and the stats are defining code. There's an example macro for the base pass there. And the individual stats get attached to specific render graph event scopes or RHI breadcrumb scopes. And then all of the rendering that happens within those scopes gets attributed to these stats. And something important to note is that these stats can appear multiple times in the renderer, and they so like, for example, I think the post-processing one is an example where there's actually multiple places in the renderer we tag with post-processing. And then the data that you see in stat GPU is an amalgamation of that. So kind of we accumulate and sum the results. So for the first time, we are now multi-GPU aware and multi-queue aware. This was the big change in 5.6. Previously with stat GPU, you'd only get the single graphics pipe of your first GPU. So if you're running async compute, you'd never see the information from async compute. Or if you're running a virtual production scenario with multiple GPUs and so on, you never got the information about those GPUs. Now we get all of it. And so each of these stat pages that are highlighted with the brackets, they're all actually independent stat pages. It just uses the standard Unreal stat system. And you can bring them up individually with the longer format command, stat GPU, and then the index, the queue type, and another index. It's all built so that we can, in future, support potentially more than one compute queue, but at the moment, there's just the one. But we've also repurposed the standard stat GPU command, which is just like a macro command now. It toggles all of them on and all of them off. So if you've got like muscle memory of typing stat GPU, then it will still work as it did before. But the actual data that we present now has been greatly expanded. We now have these 3 separate columns. The one on the far left is what you used to see before. It's the busy time. It's the time actually spent doing useful work, running command lists, running shaders. The middle column and the column on the right are the 2 new ones that we've added. The middle column is the wait time. And going back to that example I gave during the recap, that's the time when one queue is waiting for another queue to signal events, and therefore isn't running anything useful. You may find that generally the compute queue, you'll see larger non-zero values because it's not always a win to run something on the compute queue because it depends on what it's overlapping with on the graphics queue. Portions of the frame on the compute queue is just idle, waiting for fences to signal, waiting for the data dependencies to be resolved. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you see lots of wait time on the compute queue. However, the graphics queue we tend to try and keep busy all the time, so generally the numbers there should be closer to 0. And then the column on the right-hand side is idle time. We've never had a stat like this in Unreal Engine before. This is really cool. Because we know exactly when the work gets submitted, so in modern APIs like D3D12, we know exactly when the work gets submitted to the driver. We know exactly when the GPU is completing the work. We can now see that the GPU has gone idle because it's run out of work from the CPU. So a non-zero value here means that the GPU has actually completed all of its work and is gone idle because the CPU hasn't given it anything further, which is a good indication that your title is at least partially CPU bound for that duration of the frame. So if you see non-zero values here, be sure you're running in a test build or something with good CPU perf, otherwise it's not very representative. But if you do see non-zero values, that kind of warrants some further investigation with Unreal Insights or other tools. And one very important thing to note is that the queues are, because the queues are concurrent, you can't just add up these numbers across the queue pages. That wouldn't make any sense. Each of the stat pages have a queue total stat, which is the one at the top, which gives you the total amount of work in each of the columns for that frame. But if you're looking for an overall GPU stat time that tells you kind of like the ballpark figure of how long the GPU took for the whole frame across all queues, you need to be using the stat GPU time for that, which is the one highlighted with the arrow. We compute this stat by taking a union of all the busy times across all of the queues, and then that goes into that final stat time, which is for the frame. And that particular stat is the one that drives systems like dynamic resolution, because we need like a single stat to say how expensive the GPU is this frame, and then we can scale things up and down with that. So moving on to profile GPU. You may have already seen this command before. It's a command you can run in the in-game consoles. It produces a text log that goes out to the UE log, so it's either into the debugger output window if you've got Visual Studio attached, or the editor log window, or the log file itself. It gives you a table, nice view breakdown of absolutely everything that happened in the frame. And again, it's driven by our RHI breadcrumb system that I'll come to later. And this will include all of the individual RDG pass names. So there's a couple ways you can use this. I use this sometimes just to check if a certain pass is even running. It's quite a handy command to just throw into the console, see the output log, and go, oh yeah, this particular post-process pass is running in this frame. But of course, it gives you all of the stat breakdowns. So we have, for the first time, we now show both exclusive and inclusive timings. I think previously we only showed the inclusive timings. And also, again, as the kind of theme with the changes that we've made here, we're now also multi-GPU and multi-queue aware. So you get one of these tables per GPU per queue. So if you have async compute enabled, you get 2 tables. You get one for graphics, one for compute. But if you're trying to use this tool to focus on a particular render pass, a particular shader, to kind of optimize and tune things, it might be best for you to turn off async compute with that the cvar r.rdg.async compute 0. The reason for this is because as compute work overlaps with work on the graphics queue, they can affect the timings of each other because they're sharing execution resources. So if you're trying to focus on a specific pass, it's worth turning that off. When you turn it off, everything will fall back to the graphics queue, and then everything kind of lines up. There's a whole chunk of console variables that you can use to filter this table and show and hide columns that you don't want to see. In this particular the screenshot example I have at the top, I've actually filtered the tree down to just the scene node, and you can do that with the r.profilegpu.root console variable. It just takes a string, and you can put wildcards in, and it will show you only the event names that match that. So if you're focusing on, like, say, post-processing, that you can just set the route to post-processing, you only get that section of the table visible. One other important thing to note, some text editors don't handle Unicode fixed width characters very well. So those kind of pretty bars that we draw now to show the kind of relative timings, some text editors just can't handle that, and it's all out of alignment. So if you find that, I'd either recommend changing your font to one that can handle those characters, because then you get the nice table view. But otherwise, you can set that .unicode output cvar to 0, and we'll fall back to just ASCII characters, and then the table should line up properly. Okay, so moving on to Unreal Insights. Hopefully, you've all been using this tool to profile the CPU, but now we've greatly enhanced our GPU capabilities in Unreal Insights. Again, as with the theme, we're now multi-GPU aware and multi-queue aware. So we have one timeline per queue per GPU. And these queues are aligned correctly with the CPU as well. So you can see the motion of work from CPU into GPU and back again, and see where the weights are happening if you have bubbles in your pipeline and that kind of thing. And maybe some of you are familiar with the context switch data that you can get in Unreal Insights, which you see on CPU threads that tell you exactly when the thread is actually scheduled and running. We have something similar now on the GPU. So we're able to, with the extra information we get from the new profiler, draw these regions that highlight exactly when the queues are running and when they're waiting and when they're idle. So the highlighted regions on the timeline at the top currently are the regions where we're doing the GPU busy work. And this, again, it's the same stats that you get from stat GPU. It's literally these regions that we're summing up to produce that data. And then the highlighted regions here are the GPU wait regions where the queue is blocked. And you can see here the lower line is the async compute queue. And you can see that there's just more wait work happening there because that's just generally what async compute does. And then finally, we have the kind of grayed out regions that don't have any marker above them, and that's the idle regions, the places where the GPU has stopped because there's nothing further for it to do. The CPU hasn't given it any more work to do. So we've also added, similarly to the tasks channel on the CPU in Unreal Insights, we now have these fence dependency arrows. You can bring these up by just single-clicking on one of the markers, like the frame marker. So yeah, the screenshot I have here is just single-clicking on the frame marker, and it shows all of the weight dependencies between the two queues. And each one of these is a fence that is getting signaled and waited upon, and it's the thing that is driven by our RHI transition API. Not an API that you generally need to deal with, because RDG deals with all that stuff for you. But as RDG knows that there's a data dependency between certain passes, then this is when we get these fences. But of course, this is quite a busy view to look at. So if we zoom in and just look at a single example of one of these arrows to get a feel for exactly how they appear on the timeline. The top line, again, is the graphics queue. The lower line is the compute queue. And here we have some nanite base pass work that's running for several milliseconds, and a region where the async compute queue is just waiting for graphics to catch up. So if we zoom in a little further, this is that same arrow. So we have that region in the top left corner where the graphics queue is doing the busy work. And as soon as that busy work completes, we signal the fence. And that's denoted by these two matching fence numbers. They appear just below the markers on the timeline. And these are the indices of the specific fence. They just increment along the pipe. So the very first fence ever submitted is index 1. And it shows you exactly where the fence is signaled and where the fence is resolved, because that might not always line up exactly. You could signal a fence much earlier, and then it gets waited on much later if just the way things line up. So you can see here, the fence gets signaled, the compute queue goes from a waiting state back into an idle state, because there's always some amount of latency that's associated with signaling a fence. But after a very short period of time, you can see the compute queue springs back into life, and we get back into a GPU busy state. So as I mentioned before, since we have the GPU queues aligning correctly now with the CPU timeline and insights, we can get a lot of information from the flow, the kind of pipeline of data into the GPU. So one thing that's worth mentioning, a lot of our platform RHIs now have an RHI submission thread. And this is the thread that sits between the RHI thread and the GPU itself and the driver. Primarily, it's used for batching work together to reduce GPU overhead and driver overhead, so we're just making fewer calls into the OS. And it's also the thread that resolves fences. So in the example again on the timeline, the very upper left corner, we have the RHI thread with this RHI submit to GPU marker. That marker is the place where we take the work that we've produced in the kind of the CPU threaded side of the renderer and hand it down to the submission thread. The submission thread runs for some amount of time doing this batching work and resolving the fences. And then eventually we hit that blue region on the right, which is where we actually call into the OS. And then you can see the GPU queue springs into life immediately afterwards. And similarly to the submission thread where work is flowing into the GPU, we have another thread that's monitoring work completion on the GPU to then signal the rest of the engine. We call this the RHI interrupt thread. It's basically just one thread that sits and waits on fences to see the work that we submitted to the queue, know when it's completed, and then goes and signals the rest of the engine. And one thing to note is that we have, generally we have one of these threads, but it actually handles all of the GPU queues. So you'll see this thread wake up whenever any one of the queues completes some work. So you'll see them kind of springing into life. So in the timeline example, this particular example is occlusion queries. So the very bottom left corner, we have the GPU doing occlusion queries for the previous frame. And then in the top right on the foreground worker thread, we have the code in the renderer that's doing the init views pass, the scene visibility pass, that wants that data back, and it's waiting on the occlusion query results from that frame. So the GPU completes the work, signals fence. There's a little fence number. You might not be able to see it on the slide, but where that arrow is pointing. The fence gets resolved. It wakes up the interrupt thread. The interrupt thread polls the queues across all of the GPU to know what work has just completed, sees that it's this particular piece of work that's completed, grabs the event and fires it into task graph, which then wakes up the task graph. So with this kind of this flow of data, the RHI submission thread, the RHI interrupt thread, and then the alignment of the timelines, you can now use insights to really know where your bottlenecks are, where your bubbles are, and you can do analysis of the pipeline all the way back from the GPU all the way through to the render thread, which is super powerful, super useful. So that covers the improvements we've made to the new profiler. I'll move on now to talk about our new RHI submission pipeline, which shipped in 5.5. And in this section, I'm going to be focusing primarily on the RHI API itself. Day to day, this isn't an API that you'll be kind of directly using. Generally, if you're writing renderer features these days, you'll be using render graph. So sort of like some of the details here are real low-level stuff inside the RHI, but it's still very useful to know about this if you're doing performance analysis and you're looking in insights and trying to work out where your bottlenecks are, where your threading is going, that kind of thing. So I'll start by just defining a few high-level types that you'll see in the code. We have the FRHI command list base type, which has most of the implementation for recording RHI command lists. And then the three derived types from that, which are just sort of mostly adapter classes that give you access to things like the draw call API and the dispatch API and so on. And the special case in there is the RHI command list immediate, that last option there. The immediate command list is a singleton in the engine that's owned by the render thread and is kind of the primary entry point into the pipeline for submitting work to the GPU. We also then have the types that are implemented per platform RHI. So there's these base interfaces that are then implemented by each RHI module. The main one there being the RHI compute context and RHI command context types. The contexts in the RHI are kind of the objects that are involved in converting the recorded RHI commands from the renderer into the actual GPU commands that run on the hardware. So it's within the context that we're calling into, say, D3D12 and actually producing D3D command lists. And those produced D3D command lists end up getting wrapped in this iRHI platform command list type. which is used just for the management and the submission pipeline. And one thing to be aware of, we have lots of legacy names around this stuff because this system has been around since like the early UE4 days, maybe even UE3. So the IRHI command context is specifically for the graphics pipe, but it doesn't mention the word graphics in it, even though we have a compute context called IRHI compute context. So yeah, I'm sure one day we'll be renaming these, but that hasn't happened just yet. So as a general kind of high-level overview of how this process works, the renderer and render graph creates instances of FRHI command list. There's one of these per recording thread, and the commands that get inserted into this command list happens in CPU order. But a single RHI command list can record work into multiple RHI contexts. You have one of these contexts per pipeline that you're targeting, so either graphics or compute. Generally, you have either one or two contexts per command list. And as the commands are inserted, we have these two functions, switch pipeline and enqueue lambda multipipe. That is what toggles between, it directs the commands towards whichever appropriate context the commands are for. So say, for example, when render graph is replaying passes and there's a pass for the graphics queue and then a pass for the compute queue, inside render graph, there will be a call to switch pipeline from one to the other to direct it over to async compute. All of our RHI command lists are submitted via the immediate command list with those two functions there, the queue async command list submit and immediate flush. And all of our command lists they operate in two phases. They're either, they're initially recorded and then later what we call translated. And translation is that process of replaying the recorded commands, calling into the RHI context and generating the actual GPU platform commands. And so this is exactly what the switch pipelines looks like. In the center is an example command list with loads of commands in, and then you get the kind of interleaved switch pipeline calls that just direct, when we do the translate, it directs those following commands into the appropriate context. One other thing to note is the contexts themselves are acquired lazily. So if you have a command list that only uses graphics, it will only acquire a graphics context and only do the work for the graphics pipe. So it saves you the work of like, if you were to grab both at the same time, you'd end up with a context that had no work in it, and it's just an overhead. So at this point, I'll apologize. I'm going to switch to just reading directly from my speaker notes because this slide is really complicated. And yeah, there's a lot of information here that I need to make sure that I get right. So we'll have to bear with me and read just from my notes. So over the next few slides, I'll walk through an example of how RHI command lists are created, recorded, dispatched, translated, and submitted to the GPU. This is a multi-step process with lots of tasks and parallelism. You don't need to take all of the information in on this slide immediately, as I'll be stepping through the stages and adding arrows to the slide to show task flow. Solid arrows indicate where one task starts another, and dashed arrows indicate where a wait is resolved. The colored boxes represent threads or chains of tasks. They execute left to right on the slide. None of the steps block unless a step is explicitly marked as a wait. To begin, the render thread creates 3 new RHI command lists, which we'll label A, B, and C. It then kicks a set of tasks to record work into these command lists. Each recording task runs concurrently. The main source of these tasks in the renderer today are from render graph parallel pass execution. When the command lists have been fully recorded, the recording tasks will call finish recording. This function signals that the command list is completed and ready for dispatch. Meanwhile, the render thread has continued on and has called queue async command list submit, passing the 3 command lists. The order of A, B, C is significant, as this is the submission order, and therefore the order that the work will be sent to the GPU. Queue async command list submit will launch a new task called the dispatch task. This task is responsible for grouping command lists together into translate chains to achieve parallelism. It starts by creating a state structure to track the progress of the submission. After creating the state structure, the dispatch task awaits completion of the first command list in submission order. This wait is resolved once the recording task is called finish recording. At this point, command list A is ready for dispatch. Since this is the first command list in the submission, the dispatch thread starts a new translate chain. This is another task graph task which is responsible for replaying the commands recorded in the RHI command lists into RHI contexts. Translation is the process that calls into the platform RHI implementation to generate actual GPU-specific command lists. The translate chain acquires the relevant RHI context by calling RHI get command context, and then executes the command lists. The contexts acquired are stored on the chain for later use. Command list A is deleted once execution has completed. While translation of command list A is in flight, the record task for B has finished. The dispatch task has been waiting for B to be completed, and once it has, dispatches B. Since A and B were relatively short command lists, the dispatch task decided to append B to the first translation chain. The context for the translation chain, the context the translation chain acquired while translating A are reused for B. Again, B is executed and then deleted. As before, the dispatch task has moved forward and is now waiting for C to be completed. However, this time, the dispatch task decides that it should avoid appending C to the first chain to achieve better parallelism. Instead, it issues a close command to chain 1. This causes chain 1 to finalize the context it acquired once all translations in that chain have completed. Finalizing an RHI context converts it into an iRHI platform command list pointer, which contains all the platform-specific GPU work generated by that context ready for submission. These pointers are stored on the chain for later. Meanwhile, the second chain is started by a dispatch task. As before, contexts are acquired, C is executed, and then deleted. While all of this has been happening, the render thread has continued on and called immediate flush on the immediate command list. This function flushes all prior work and will eventually result in submission of work to the GPU. It achieves this by appending a submit command to the end of the dispatch task to run after all prior command list dispatches have completed. The submit command closes the last open translate chain. This is the same as before. The acquired contexts are finalized into platform command list pointers. The submit command also enqueues a task for the RHI thread. The RHI thread waits for the translate chains to be closed, then retrieves the finalized platform command lists. It then forwards these command lists to the platform RHI implementation via RHI submit command lists. Again, the order is important. Work from chain 1 is submitted before work from chain 2. Finally, the tracking state structure is deleted. So there we are. That's the full graph. That's quite a lot. As I mentioned, this is the full run through of everything that happens from the render thread all the way down to the RHI thread. An interesting thing to note is that this final box in the lower right, that was the marker that I was referring to when we were talking about Unreal Insights earlier. The RHI submit to GPU marker that occurs on the RHI thread. So that whole flow graph goes up to that point, and then after that point, the platform command lists get pushed into the platform RHI, and then from that point, the submission thread and the GPU is kind of an implementation detail of the particular platform that you're running on. So this is what the translate chains look like if you were to take an insights capture. Each one of these lines here is a single translate chain, and each of the blue markers within those lines is a single RHI command list that's being translated. We have this RHI_translate marker above each of them. And each of the chains end with an RHI finalize command, which is the pink marker at the end of each line. And one thing that we do here is that to avoid some task graph overhead, as we build these chains, we append command lists to the end of the existing chain atomically in a way that the task, if the command list has arrived before the task is finished, it sees that there's another command list to continue, and it just pops it and just loops back again and runs it again, which minimizes the overhead. We used to have a version of this where there was gaps between each because every single command list was a task graph task, and the overhead was too much. But crucially, the question then becomes, when exactly do we break the chain? How do we decide how wide we're going? How many of these chains we're producing? The short answer is we count the number of commands on the RHI command list. We have a num commands field per RHI command list. Every time you call a function on an RHI command list that results in an allocated command that just increments that counter. And then by the time the RHI command list arrives at the dispatch thread or the dispatch tasks, we know how many commands are coming up. We know kind of roughly how big the command list is. And then we have this cvar r.rhi command.parallel translate.max commands per translate. And it's just a high watermark. You set that value to like 1,000 or something, then we'll build chains up until the next command list will breach that limit, and then we'll start a new chain. But besides that mechanism, there's also a handful of reasons why we can't do parallel translate on some command lists. The full reasoning is the code snippet on there. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but that's kind of the function you want to look at if you want the reasons. The The main one being, or one of the big ones, is any use of the immediate command list. That's the one that's the global singleton, the one that's owned by the render thread. Because that thing's been around since very early UE4, there's a lot of systems that were still using it that relied on, that weren't thread safe. So it wasn't possible to run that stuff in parallel. So even today, any use of the immediate command list to do drawing work will result in a single thread translate and is a bit of a perf hit. So generally you should avoid unnecessary use. That means like in your render graph passes, the type of the command list that you can take a base one, just like FRHI command list, which will allow parallel translate. But if you take one that is the immediate command list, then you'll be causing this to happen. There's also a mechanism that we call the lock fence. The name came about because this was originally used in RHI buffers for lock and unlock to update buffers on the GPU. But it's used today for any time there's an RHI command that will mutate the CPU side of an RHI resource. The reason that buffers use it is because on most of our platforms, when we lock and unlock a buffer, we're not actually updating the original buffer, we're allocating a brand new buffer in GPU memory to avoid having to stall anything. And then we do a kind of a swap, we call it a rename, which is where we there's like a pointer to the current buffer in the RHI, and at some point we swap out that value for the old one, discard and free the old buffer. But of course, if multiple translates are happening in parallel, we want to ensure that all the commands that happened before the lock see the old value, and all the ones happening after see the new value. So we have to fall back to a single thread translate, and this is what that RHI thread fence with true as the argument causes to happen. But again, you won't necessarily run into that yourself. It's just an implementation detail of the API. There are certain APIs that do these mutates that will have this just kind of built in. And then finally, we also have this additional command console variable r.rhi command.parallel-translate.combine single and parallel. And so when this is enabled, it means that any an RHI command list that could have been parallel translated will be a candidate to join a translate chain that is forced down to single thread. So if you turn this off, then it means that any RHI command list that could be parallel translated will be parallel translated, and it won't be kind of siloed into running on just the RHI thread because of some other command list that has to be single thread translated. So that console variable, together with the max commands per translate one, are your two primary tunables for determining how wide the renderer will go. Excuse me. So these are the two kind of things you want to experiment with and run a load of perf captures on if you're targeting hardware that has fewer cores or more cores. Generally, you'll want to go wider if you're on a system with multiple cores, or go narrower if you're on a more limited system. And I think I already mentioned, but the single thread translate always runs on the RHI thread. And this was, again, because of a legacy reasoning. There's certain code that expects to be on the actual physical RHI thread. And we achieve this with some task dependencies between the tasks. And again, so this is what this looks like in Insights. So this you'll get single thread translate anytime that allow parallel translate function on the command list returns false. And you can see we have 2 blocks of parallel work, and then we just fall back to single thread for a duration. I think this screenshot's probably about over a year old now, and the reason for this particular single thread translate was some ray tracing APIs that was using the immediate command list. I believe we fixed this now, although don't hold me to that. And yeah, so we're slowly moving towards a world where we're trying to reduce the amount of single thread translate that happens, because it's just a perfect, it's just a bubble in the pipeline. Doesn't scale very well. So a few kind of caveats and clarifications about all the stuff I've just said. Any thread can create an RHI command list instance, but only the render thread can submit them. A good example of this would be our mesh streaming system. In order to stream a mesh, we're pulling like vertex and index data off the hard disk, and on PC, getting that into the actual GPU memory involves work on the GPU. The OS, like Windows, will get you as far as bringing the data into system memory, into an upload heap, but then the GPU actually has to copy that data into its local memory. So as a result, if you want to create a buffer in the RHI, you need a command list. The function to create a buffer is on the command list type. And so what happens in the mesh streamer is the mesh streamer thread that's running in the background creates its own RHI command list. It uses it to create the buffers and fill them in with the initial data. And then the very last step of the mesh streaming system, when the buffer gets handed over to the renderer, is a task on the render thread gets enqueued. And then the command list that it created gets handed along with that and then submitted through the immediate command list. And from that point onwards, the buffers are now safe to use. So there's kind of like a handover mechanism that happens. The dispatch task, sort of in quotes, is not isolated to a single submit. You could think of this as a thread, really. We don't call it a thread because it isn't a physical thread, but it is a continual chain of dependent tasks. I know in the kind of flow graph example I gave earlier, it looks like the dispatch task is only relevant for that particular submit, but actually there's dependencies off either end of that, and it's just a chain of tasks. So yeah, so like a dispatch for a subsequent job won't run until the previous ones have completed in submission order. But generally, the dispatch tasks are so short, you don't see them being a bottleneck. The recording and the translate chain tasks complete out of order, but the dispatch and submission is always in order. Again, this goes back to that. The reason why we have the lock fence and so on is because those translate jobs, they're just kind of free to run on the task graph and they complete out of order. But all of this management logic then has to kind of reorder everything back into the correct order to hit the actual GPU queues. And then finally, the immediate command list works exactly the same as the parallel ones. You can do drawing on it. You can do all the same stuff that you can with the parallel command list. I'd advise you don't, because we should be avoiding the immediate command list. But the only difference is that you don't call finish recording. Finish recording was a mechanism to get this kind of parallel stuff to work, and it doesn't need to happen on the immediate command list. I think it'll actually crash if you do, or there's an assert in there, I think. Okay, so that covers all of our submission pipeline stuff. But we'll now just kind of go into our RHI breadcrumb system. And the RHI breadcrumb system forms the kind of underpinnings of everything that we've done in the new GP profiler. And it came about as there were multiple systems in the engine and in the renderer that were trying to label renderer work so that you can see what you're working on in a pix capture or anything like that. And all the systems were kind of competing with each other. They weren't correct in all the threading scenarios, and there's multiple ways that the engine runs threads across all the different platforms. So we needed a system that kind of brought everything together, and the RHI breadcrumb system is what came out of that. So this is what they look like in Insights. You probably can't read that on the slide, but the area that's highlighted with the brackets, everything from the frame marker down is a breadcrumb, and the breadcrumbs. We tag certain areas of the renderer with certain names, and then that same breadcrumb appears everywhere that it can. So you'll see them on the render thread, you'll see them on parallel pass RDG execution, you'll see them on the parallel translate, you'll see them on the RHI thread, you'll also see them on the GPU. It's all the same marker all the way through. And this gives us some real good context as to like what a thread is working on. Previously, you just saw, oh, it's doing render graph stuff, but you actually had no idea what pass it was working on. If something's really expensive, you have to kind of profile with sampling or something. So these are in every build that has that macro enabled with RHI breadcrumbs, which in vanilla UE is every debug and dev config build, but also builds with the profile GPU command enabled. There's some additional macros that can turn that on in test or shipping. And when you do that, you'll also get the breadcrumb system as part of that, because the profile GPU relies on the breadcrumb system to work. And then we also have this console variable r.rdg.events. This determines how much detail render graph will emit to the breadcrumb system. Obviously, emitting all of the detail all the time is more expensive than not. So the default value here will only emit the high-level scopes, things like scene, base pass, post-processing, that kind of thing. But you can turn this all the way up to number 3, and when you get to level 3, you get all of the scopes, all of the info, all of the pass names, including all their parameters and everything. And that's actually implicitly what happens when you do a profile GPU, is it internally turns that CVAR kind of to 3, and you get everything in a profile GPU capture. And so this is what they actually look like in code. And like I said, because this was kind of a drawing together of multiple systems that work differently, there's multiple scope macros here that all feed into the same system now. So the implementation of these macros all feed to the same place now. So around the renderer, you'll see the scope draw events that have been there for a long time. And then in the lower left is the new breadcrumb macro that this all kind of feeds into. And that macro is capable of taking either an RHI command list or an RHI context. So you'll actually see some of these inside platform RHIs now. The example on the slide there is D3D12's defrag pass that happens at the beginning of the frame. We can now label stuff that is specific to the platform RHI in the same breadcrumb system, and then you'll get the markers everywhere. You'll get them in Insights, you'll get them in pix and so on. And then the ones on the right, render graph. The one at the top, the event scopes, are the ones that you get by default with the events greater than or equal to 1. And then the lower one, the pass names, are the ones that you'll see when you turn the full system on. So this is a kind of quick overview of how the breadcrumb system works, like the operation of it. As we're recording RHI command lists, we build a tree of RHI breadcrumb nodes that refer to the actual breadcrumb names themselves. And all of that code is cross-platform, so it works on all of our platforms. And since RHI command lists are, they can be recorded, like with the mesh streamer, they can be recorded on entirely separate threads that are separate from the render thread. Each RHI command list itself builds a subtree of nodes as it walks in and out of the scopes. And then at the dispatch time, when the dispatch thread acquires that command list for submission, it gets attached to the root tree, which then means that those subtrees appear in the overall kind of overarching tree for the whole frame, and we get the full context all the way up to the frame marker. And we also do by-value capture of the format args. So the primary reason for this is that we want to be able to capture all of the context. Like there's a marker at the beginning of the frame which is frame n, where n is an integer. And rather than just calling it frame and not having that extra context, we capture the 4 bytes for the integer and the pointer to the format string. And then it means that we only have to do the formatting when we need the actual name, which for the most part, if you're not actually running insights, if you're not running like a snapshot of that frame of profile GPU, we don't do the string formatting, so it's a lot cheaper. So there's a handful of functions on the RHI command list, which you don't need to call directly, but I'll just mention them here for completion's sake. So begin and end breadcrumb CPU and begin and end breadcrumb GPU. The CPU functions are used for inserting the insights markers. This is how we get them into insights. It's also used for CPU crash reporting. This is something really cool now, is that if you crash, like in previous versions of the engine, if you crash on a thread that is inside a render graph pass, just a parallel pass, generally the call stack doesn't give you much information because the call stack just takes you back to some execute task that came from the task graph. You have no idea what pass it was or anything like that, unless it's particularly a problem for compute shader passes, because compute shader passes, there's like a general add compute shader pass function, and you get no context from the call stack. So now when we crash, we can dump into the crash report the stack of breadcrumbs from the thread that crashed, which gives you all that extra information. Likewise for the parallel translate, if you crash inside the RHI, you know where in the frame you came from. And the CPU functions are the ones that build the tree. They're the ones that kind of do all of the bookkeeping and everything. It's quite complicated because we have lots of different threading modes in the engine, so it might be quite hard to wrap your head around. It certainly took a while to write, but that's where all the bookkeeping is. And then the GPU functions are the ones that actually go and insert pix markers, render dot markers, and the insights GPU markers that we see now. And we also have a new system as a result of this for GPU crash debugging. And so this is what our new GPU crash debugging system looks like. You can turn this on with any of those options at the top there, dash GPU crash debugging, dash GPU breadcrumbs on the command line, or their equivalent CVARs, which do the same thing, r.gpu crash debugging 1, r.gpu crash debugging breadcrumbs 1. The first one there is like a larger features thing that turns on a lot of systems, whereas the lower one is just specifically turning on the system that you see on the slide. And the way this works, as we encounter breadcrumbs, as we're replaying them into RHI context to produce the GPU command lists, every time we enter a breadcrumb scope and exit a breadcrumb scope, we insert on D3D12, for example, we use write buffer immediate to insert an integer write into the command list stream. And those integers get written to a buffer that persists even if the GPU crashes. There's some mechanism in Windows that allows you to get that data back. So what we can do is basically the GPU is marking how far through the frame it got the whole time it's running. And then on the RHI interrupt thread, when we see that the GPU has crashed, we get the device removed error, we jump into the crash handler, and we can pull back those integer values and then look through the list of work that we know was in flight on the GPU that we haven't completed yet, find the corresponding range of markers, and then dump that to the log. And again, because we're multi-GPU, multi-queue aware, you'll get one of these dumps per queue. And so the example here was some particular. It's really handy. When I was putting these slides together, someone had a GPU crash in Lumen, so I just stole the log and then could dump it into here. We do have a debug GPU hang like test command, but it's like a kind of a contrived example. You should see it's like GPU crash debug hang. That's the pass that crashed. Oh, surprise, surprise. So in this case, it was something in Lumen that was crashing, and the likely culprits are going to be the ones that are the most indented nodes that are still marked as active, which we've highlighted in orange here. But the one thing to be aware of Oh yeah, so the stuff that's highlighted in gray there, we know that we've not started that because the GPU hasn't, the command processor hasn't emitted that breadcrumb marker in submission order yet. So we know that's not the culprit. It's something before then. One thing to be aware of is that some hardware can report completion of work even though it's not actually completed. There can be like memory operations that are still in flight that might still cause a page fault on the GPU. So some of those nodes there that are marked as finished, take that with a bit of a pinch of salt, and maybe gather multiple repros and see if there's a pattern of whether or not like that upper bound it changes a lot. Okay, so that's pretty much everything. I hope all the information here helps you guys with profiling your games and resolving all of your horrible CPU and GPU perf bottlenecks. Thank you very much, and I'd like to open the floor to Q&A.